Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
I'm Paul New.
And I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps from AOPA.
On Ask the A&Ps, you challenge us with your trickiest and most elusive maintenance questions,
gosh.
and we try our best to answer them. Sometimes our best is none too good, but we always try our best. So if you have a tricky question, please send it to us at podcasts@aopa.org.
Please follow and subscribe so you won't find us to be elusive, and be alerted when a new show comes out.
And if you'd like to get on our mailing list for our monthly newsletter and other interesting stuff, we recently sent out a big mailing about the Moss interpretation stay. The easiest way to get on our mailing list is to text the word SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777. And the little bot will ask you for your name and email address and put you on our mailing list. So once again, to get on the list, text SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777.
So I wanted to talk this week briefly about the new AD that the FAA put out on the Lycoming small end connecting rod bushings.
We don't talk briefly about anything.
Well, we're going to try.
Okay.
This is where the connecting rod connects to the piston pin that moves the piston in and out in the cylinder. And the bushing is in that small end of that rod. And Lycoming had a bad batch of bushings dating back to 2009, which they detected pretty early on. And working with the FAA, they put out a previous AD, which was 2017-1611, which said that you had to inspect these bushings and see if you had a certain lot of them. They're following up with a new AD, just came out. It's 2024-2102, which requires enhanced visual inspection during regularly scheduled oil changes to detect indications of deterioration of these connecting rod bushings. And the interesting thing here is that the inspection can be done by the pilot owner. It doesn't have to be done by an A&P, and it requires cutting open the oil filter at an oil inspection, oil replacement. So if you do your own oil changes, you have to cut the filter open and look at the pleats of the oil filter for evidence of bronze, which is what these bushings are made out of. And that's kind of a first for the FAA to allow owners to sign off the AD themselves. Well,
it's not actually a first, but it's very
rare.
unusual.
It's rare,
unusual, yeah.
And it seems unusually kind for the FAA to do that. Colleen, what was the reason that they issued this second AD? Why wasn't the first AD sufficient?
I think they're trying to they're worried about bushings that might have been installed that were still on the shelf. And I don't know. If you look at the AD, it says they've had failures. I'm not sure why.
This wasn't a revision of the 2017 AD. It's the whole new AD that supersedes it.
Yeah. It's a completely new AD.
Because I remember distinctly back in 2017 when that first thing came out and everybody was pulling cylinders and trying to get a hold of the magic tool to test the bushings. I talked to a couple of engine shop owners, and they said, "Oh yeah, those we've known for years that those Lycoming bushings were terrible. We always use superior bushings. We never use those Lycoming ones because they're terrible." Yeah. So apparently, this was like everybody knew about this.
Yeah, actually, that first AD came out like 2 months after I closed up my Cardinals IO360, and I totally freaked out. This is why I didn't want to do an overhaul, because you're introducing unknown parts into your engine. And I called Rick Romans, who did the overhaul of my connecting rods. And
he said, "Oh no, we used superior."
The woman who runs the shop, I love that. She said, "Oh, honey, we knew those were coming a long time ago, and we switched to superior bushings."
Yeah. No, that
was
exactly.
Oh, honey.
It's a good thing it wasn't a guy that said that.
She was awesome. And yeah, so they knew it was the bushings just did not fit right. They were loose in the connecting rod.
And
So-
we've seen similar problems a while back with Continental engines where the bushings would
Migrated.
come out, and they would gradually move sideways until they projected enough out the side of the connecting rod that a chunk would just break off. And you'd see these semicircular pieces of metal that were and on the Continentals, I don't think this is true of the Lycoming bushings. On Continentals, they were bimetallic. They had a steel backing with a bronze inside. So they looked copper color, but they stuck to a magnet. It was very obvious where the metal was coming from.
I think it's important. I don't know if it says in the AD because I almost never see a Lycoming. I saw the AD come out, but I didn't spend a lot of time poring over it. And Mike mentioned this earlier about the sump screen.
The suction screen, yeah.
The suction screen in the bottom of the sump. And that's
most likely where the stuff would be caught because
it's
typically is pretty big.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't even know that exists. There's a lot of mechanics that don't know that suction screen is there, especially mechanics who spend most of their time on Continentals. So since we're talking to listeners, if you have a Lycoming, you're going to do this yourself because it's considered apparently preventive maintenance in the AD. As a pilot owner, instead of just doing the filter, go find the sump screen and be sure and pull that. You'll have to know how to safety wire, but you got to know how to do that too. You got to have a crush washer.
You have to have a lot of four-letter words too to get to the sump screen.
Depending on the airplane.
Depends on the installation, but some airplanes they gather Moonies and stuff. It's really hard to get to.
It's not fun. Yeah,
twin Comanches they can be a real pain, but you have to have a crush washer. So be sure you have all the parts before you dive into this.
I stock them. I have three Lycoming engines, so
So are yours -11s or 21s? Do you remember
the crush washers?
Yeah,
I don't remember. I don't remember.
Doesn't matter.
I think it's the same crush washer between the IO 540 and the IO 360 and the O 360.
Probably.
I think they're all the same plug.
They are. They're all the same plug.
It's a 7/8 inch plug, isn't it?
Yep.
Yes. Looking at the AD, it just says the AD was prompted by uncontained engine failures and in-flight shutdowns, which has its own acronym, IFSD. Didn't know that.
Wow.
So it's just a continuation of the previous AD, but I think that they expanded the serial numbers that you need of the engines that are affected. If you go to the Lycoming site, there's a page that says FAA Airworthiness Directive AD 2024-2102, Lycoming's engine response to the engine AD. And it talks about the history of it, and then it gives a link to an engine serial number history search to see if your engine was shipped during the date range. So they have some background. They also have links to the service bulletins that talk about inspecting for the metallic particles that they're looking for. It's Service Bulletin 480F, which expands inspection guidance for engines potentially affected. And it also talks about the previous history of this AD. So,
man, you can always count on Colleen to research all the way to the bottom of the barrel.
And the other interesting thing is, some people wonder if you have to do an oil change at the annual. I don't. I do mine at regular intervals. The AD says at the next oil change starting December 5th or within 4 months after the date of this AD, whichever occurs first, you must do this inspection. And then every oil change after that. So now if you're an owner operator doing your own oil change, you have to write the logbook entry and also write compliance with the AD. And that will be good enough for your IA when your annual comes around.
Yeah. Go find CFR 43.9 and make your log entry in compliance with that requirement.
And then just write it the same each year.
Yeah.
Colleen, the recurring inspection requirement after the initial inspection
every 4 months
only says it's so it basically
says
the 4 months is part of the recurring
no it doesn't actually say that. It says at the next oil change or within 4 months of the effective date of the AD, and thereafter
Mhm.
at every oil change. So it doesn't say you have to do your oil changes at 4 months.
So you could do oil changes once a year and do the inspection
or once every
a year.
5 years. Yeah.
Okay.
We don't recommend that.
Well, that's an unusually
Yeah.
light-handed AD for the FAA.
They're not real concerned about
in a
it.
really good mood. They wrote that thing. Yeah, that may be true too.
And I will point out, it does say you have to inspect the oil filter, oil pressure screen, and the oil suction screen.
Oh, so it includes, that's good.
I don't pull my suction screen every oil change, but I guess I will be doing that now.
Yep.
So stock up on
Now,
those those copper
there-
crush gaskets.
There is no pressure screen if you have an oil filter, right?
That's correct.
There are alternatives. You either have a pressure screen or you have an oil filter.
Yeah.
Oil filter.
And presumably most engines nowadays have oil filters. But the suction
Yeah.
screen is really important place to look.
Yep.
Because
Definitely.
these pieces tend to be quite large, and normally, if it's larger than about 1/16 of an inch, it won't get through the screen to the oil filter, and it'll be caught by the screen.
And you can stick a borescope in there too and look around in your sump if you're looking for a missing wrench or something important. It's actually pretty interesting if you have a borescope to put it in all these places.
Yeah, it's just trying to keep the borescope lens free of oil.
Yeah.
Is a little tricky,
But I did that at the last one, and it's just I like to see it nice and clean, and it was.
Yeah.
put a little baggie over the end of it or something.
Yeah. So one question: I have never seen bronze particles in a filter. Are they orange or gold?
Copper. They're copper.
Yeah.
colored.
Copper colored?
looking. Yeah.
Okay. And no particular, it's just going to look like shiny particles, right? It's not like the slivers we see coming off of cams. No particular shape. It'll be sparkly.
It's an extrusion. It's
I know.
it's extruded at the time. By the time it gets into the sump, it's been extruded out of position. So it could take several shapes, but it's kind of going to have a little smashed look to it, I would think.
But will it be flaked off, do you think? Or I don't know how metallurgy that will.
No, it would tear because it's being
the
forced out
light
sideways.
The
look at
Lycoming
the service
bushings
bulletin.
are just bronze, right? They're not bimetallic like the Continental ones.
I think
they're just
so.
bronze.
Because the Continental ones, when those slivers came off, they had a distinctive curvature to them. But I think that's because they had a steel backing that didn't want to bend.
Mm-hmm.
And probably if they're all bronze, they probably get all flattened out by the time you get to see them.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're squished out, so it's like an extrusion. But it could tear off a little piece, or I don't think I would describe it as flaking off. Because as it's pushing out, there's also rotation involved. So it's.
But what we haven't talked about yet is what happens if you see this metal, and what happens if you see this metal is bad.
Yeah,
because you basically have to pull all your cylinders.
Yeah,
and then and all your pistons
and all the connecting rods.
Then use this special tool. We don't have to pull the connecting rods.
If you have to replace them, you can replace them. Yeah, that's true. You can replace them.
But you have to test them all. Like if you have a 6-cylinder Lycoming, you have to test all of the bushings because when you see the metal, it doesn't tell you which one it's coming from.
Yep.
And you have to get this special tool with a spring on it and that puts a calibrated side load on the bushing to see if it'll move.
Yep. You're right. You don't know which cylinder it is.
And it may not be just one. It could be more than one.
So all the cylinders have to come off.
Yeah, that's if you find the metal, that's a bad thing because that's a big deal.
So basically, the next question is, if you're doing this in your T hangar and there's no maintenance facility on the field, and
you find metal,
now is the FAA going to give you a ferry permit to fly it to where the engine's going to get worked on?
I think you very quietly just fly it to where you need to.
Wow, that is a good question. Yeah.
Does the AD specifically say before further flight if you find the metal, or
let's see?
I wouldn't be surprised if it does.
Yeah, that would be a common for that sort of thing.
If during inspection you find metal particulates, and it's identified as, and the source is identified as connecting rod bushing. So you probably want to send the metal out.
Yeah, to be sure, before you pull cylinders.
Before further flight, inspect all affected bushings for damage.
Now,
So the answer is you don't determine where it comes from until you've repositioned the airplane. It's very simple.
Yeah.
The other thing, if you look at the bottom of the AD, and I should have pulled a copy of it up, does it say anything about ferry permits? Because sometimes they'll make a specific standalone statement about whether a ferry permit might be issued.
I'm not finding it. I'm seeing alternate methods of compliance.
Yeah, it's usually down in that area.
Yeah.
It would be unlikely for them to
I don't think so.
allow ferry permits if it's a before further flight AD.
Yep. That's true.
Yeah, nothing. And the cost, the
$85 an hour cost.
Yeah, they're saying at $85 an hour per bushing, it's $382 of labor, 4.5 hours
to pull the cylinder. Yeah. Oh, that doesn't include putting it back on. Maybe they're just talking about taking it off.
So they're under $1,000.
This requires cheap, very fast mechanics.
Yeah, like nobody can hire.
You might possibly be able to do this in some rural backwater in Texas somewhere. You might be able to find $85 an hour.
Yeah. Wow.
Man.
Wow.
If you're only $85 an hour, something's really wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll feel sorry for the mechanic that's only charging that.
But the good part is that the owners can do the inspection.
Yes.
But they got to get an oil filter cutter,
and hopefully you won't find any metal in there.
Don't cut your hand off. Get a filter cutter. It's cheap and easy to do. It's kind of
DNA samples in your oil.
No.
I wonder how that shows up on the oil analysis.
Blood.
Unknown biomatter.
Yeah, gross. Okay.
My guess is it probably wouldn't show up in oil analysis because the pieces that break off are too big.
Oh, let's talk about the DNA samples, not the metal.
We're talking about
the DNA. Okay. Oh, I see.
We're being gross here.
I see. I missed that part.
Sorry, I can't get out of junior high. I'm stuck there. I'm a middle school boy. Just happens. Our first question is for Marko, who had a very scary incident on takeoff. I see that you survived it. So let us know what happened, Marko.
Yeah, first of all, I would second that idea about the T-shirts.
Okay.
Yeah. So I had a pretty scary situation when we flew back from a field nearby where we went for one of those $100 burgers, and on the takeoff flying back, immediately after we rotated, the engine started to sound strange, like sort of revving sound where you think the RPM is changing, and but I still thought I had full power, and so I immediately went for the checks. I checked the mixture, checked the prop, I turned on the boost pump, nothing solved it, and then I looked over all the way to the right side to see my EDM 700 show a really high temperature. And I thought it was the TIT, and it read above 1800. And so that wasn't good. So I knew I needed to land immediately. I pulled back the power as quickly as I could. I just leveled off at traffic pattern altitude, and pulling the power all the way back to 20 inches allowed me to maintain about 100 knots in clean configuration. And I just made a circle around and landed, and that was it. And then upon landing, I just couldn't believe what just happened. It didn't make sense. And I thought maybe a foul spark plug or something like that. And so I decided to do a run-up. Maybe not the best idea, but I did it. And the run-up showed what looked to me like cylinder number 5 EGT wasn't rising at all when I switched to one of the magnetos. The rest of the EGTs went up, but number 5 didn't. And So okay, that looked to me like number 5 wasn't firing for whatever reason, and then I shut it down. I had the shop at the field check the plane. I specifically mentioned cylinder number 5. They looked at it with a borescope. They noticed some scratch marks on the walls of the cylinder, but nothing they didn't consider normal. And other than that, the engine could be turned by hand, and it was decided that nothing seems wrong with the plane. Let's try and fire the engine up. At least that's what they did. And it actually fired and ran fine. Nothing was wrong with it. That didn't sit well with me. Something like that can't just be unexplained on a Mooney Bravo with an injected engine. So I pressed for them to investigate further. And I also bought the data cable for the EDM, which we lost. So that we could pull the data out and see what actually happened.
Awesome.
Good.
Yeah. And so they did I insisted they do a fuel system check. So they removed the injectors and put them in cups to check that the fuel flow through each of the injectors was the same. And when they did that, on one of the injectors, some debris was found. And when I got the cable for the EDM, I discovered that actually what I saw was the EGT for number 4 that was at above 1800 degrees. And EGT number 2 was lower than baseline and very erratic. And the TAT was climbing but never exceeded 1700 Fahrenheit, which on my plane, technically by the TOH numbers, 1750 is the red line. And so the diagnosis was made that this was a blocked injector, causing one cylinder to run really hot and the rest cooler and one really cool. And so my question for you guys would be, what can cause something like that? That's number one. And the second thing is, this was the second flight after our annual inspection.
You just nailed what caused it right there.
Yeah, and
Did they clean the
story.
injectors? Did they clean the injectors during the annual?
they did.
Yeah,
Oh, really?
But
yeah.
Oh, and
Yes,
and
yes, but
they did worse. They also changed the boost pump, so
Yeah.
they were all
Exactly.
into the fuel system.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's past the screens.
The injector clogging, and I've had that happen to me twice in the 310 in the time I've owned it. Always happens right after maintenance that involves opening up the fuel system.
Right.
Absolutely.
Me too.
I
Yeah.
become convinced that if you're working on the fuel system, you need
Just-
to wear rubber gloves, a mask, a hat, and
sterile.
and maybe a gown. I don't know, but
And clean all of your tools.
And don't use any white tape to
it
seal
is
the fuel lines.
so easy to get
God.
to get foreign matter into the fuel
Yeah.
system when it's opened up.
Yep.
Which is one of the reasons that we recommend never cleaning injectors unless the engine monitor indicates that an injector is potentially plugged. But to prophylactically clean nozzles tends to cause more problems than it solves.
I used to do
Because
it all
it
the
really
time.
ought to be something ought to be done in a clean room.
I don't
Yep.
do it anymore.
Well,
Yep.
and what I found, this would happen repeatedly on my twin Comanche, not because we were doing maintenance, because I just don't do that sort of thing. I mean, I do maintenance. I got to be careful how I say these things. But there were debris got into the system, and sometimes it takes a long time for debris to find its way out, and the out is through the injectors.
Yeah.
So
this is what I was going to ask, because I actually did 2 flights before this happened, after the annual inspection.
Yep.
I followed your advice, Mike, where you say that you should do a post-maintenance flight, especially when something like that is done. I actually did that, stayed for an hour above the field here at my home field.
Good job.
And nothing happened. And then the flight to this field was 40 minutes. So it took a while for it to happen.
Yeah. So what I also noticed just observing actually my guys in the shop and, just trying to think through how some of these things happen, aside from opening up the fuel system elsewhere, getting contaminants in the fuel tank, which is almost never causes the problem. I just watched them installing an injector and realized that nobody looks inside the socket. It's a deep well socket that you have to use. And when you take that socket and look inside, it's got all the nastiness that was on everything else that's been used on. So basically, your fuel injectors are having sex with every other engine that wrench was used on. And,
oh my God.
You just don't want that to happen. So,
my God, where'd that come from?
Marko, I gotta tell you that one of the 2 episodes that I had on my 310 where I had a clogged injector, it occurred right after a pretty heavy annual inspection where the fuel system was opened up by yours truly, so I can't blame anybody else. I flew the plane from California to Boston before the problem showed up. So it can take a while. That was probably 12 hours from the time that I did the dastardly deed to the time that it actually found its way into a fuel nozzle. And sometimes the thing that plugs a fuel nozzle is something like a little glob of grease or something that's actually fuel soluble. So it can clog the nozzle and then it can self-correct after a while when the fuel dissolves it and forces it out. And sometimes it's not fuel soluble and it just clogs the injector and it's stuck. But it's almost always maintenance induced.
Yep. I mounted go ahead.
No, I'm just surprised to hear that, because my main confusions from this diagnosis was, how could it possibly take 2 hours? My theory was, since it's a new boost pump, is it possible that the boost pump is producing debris by some sort of malfunction or something like that? Because for it to take that long to clog the injector didn't make sense to me.
So the fuel pump was also worked on. You had it overhauled or something.
It was replaced, yeah.
No, it's new.
Well, new. I mean, it was constructed. What I'm saying is,
right.
It had maintenance performed on it, either during assembly or whatever. So it has who knows what in it from the build process, no matter how careful they are. And then maintenance was performed when it was installed on the airplane. Right. So you've got lines that are open and closed. And if you ever look at one of those injectors, oh gosh, I've got my show and tell here. I'm leaving tomorrow to go do some classes. And so I have my show and tell, and I've got a fuel injector here. I'd show it to you, but well, I don't know. So here it is, little bitty fuel injector. This is similar to yours. And if you look down in it, there's a little bitty hole and you can just barely see through the thing. And it takes an eyelash, almost fills up the hole. It's very small and it's precisionally machined. It's not drilled. They have a little paddle that goes in there and cuts it out. And when cleaning, if there's a clog in there, you can't use like a little piece of wire, because if you scratch the sidewalls, it changes the flow. So this is it's antique, but it's very, very precise and does not sit well when anything is wrong with it. And yeah, it's real common for it to be a delayed response when there's a problem.
There's all kinds of nooks and crannies in your fuel system where things get caught.
Yeah.
The Mooney Bravo is Lycoming powered?
IO360.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I hung
and the RSA servo that it has, that has some sort of a finger screen in it, right?
Yes, it does.
On the fuel inlet.
Is it a very fine screen?
Yeah. Yeah. I just cleaned mine, which I highly recommend.
Colleen has almost the same engine. It's just not turboed.
I cleaned my finger screen and I was shocked at how much stuff was in there. So highly recommend it.
Fuzzy stuff.
Easy to get to.
Where is this filter in terms of the fuel system?
On the fuel servo. So Yep. And there's
Okay.
there's a big bolt on the side that's safetied, and you unscrew the bolt and just pull out, looks like a cigar case almost. It's about 4 inches long, maybe. And it's a screen. And it's very easy to access. You have to do it as an A&P because you're cracking open your fuel system. But
Right.
And-
I wouldn't dream of doing this, but I was just wondering because I'm curious if it's after or before the boost pump. But
it's
before,
after.
it's after. it.
Yeah.
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 So technically, it should catch anything that the boost pump might produce.
It should, but
Yep.
I don't know how-
Isn't cleaning of filters always considered to be preventive maintenance?
I don't think I don't think that's
Yeah.
fuel filter.
Isn't that one of the 31 items?
Yeah, I think he could do that.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure you guessed by my accent, I'm not exactly in the States, so I'm under EASA rules, and here that's a little bit different.
So it's not an in-registered airplane. Yeah.
No,
There's not a concept of owner perform preventive maintenance under the EASA rules.
there can be, but our maintenance program, we decided that doesn't allow that.
Okay.
I co-own the plane. I joined the owner of 18 years this year, so I'm really new to the plane, which is even more. It was even more scary when this happened because I didn't understand what was going wrong.
Right.
I had only a few hours on the plane at that point, and he had a maintenance program that doesn't allow pilot owner maintenance.
Does the maintenance program require compliance with service bulletins and
Yes,
and
ADs
Wow.
and the minimum maintenance requirements from the EASA.
Okay, so is there a requirement to clean the fuel injectors every X number of hours, or do you have to use the like the Mooney service manual annual inspection probably calls for pulling the injectors every 100 hours is my guess.
I actually don't know. I would need to look into this.
Yeah, if it doesn't, don't.
Yeah, it's not a great idea.
Yeah, it's really a bad idea. And
where are you based, Marko?
Luxembourg.
Oh,
wow.
Luxembourg. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, small country of Luxembourg.
No, over here we know. Let's see, all the small countries are where when you watch the Hallmark Christmas movies, that's where all the princes are from that the girls always find in the TV. It's
Really?
nuts. Oh yeah. It's got to be some small country that has a really smart sounding accent, and yeah.
Sounds
and lots
lovely.
of castles.
Yeah.
Lots of castles. Yeah.
Lots of castles. That's right.
Oh, wonderful. Wow. We have lots of 7-Elevens here. Sorry.
I guess that's something.
I feel like Slurpees. Yeah.
and McDonald's. Yeah.
And McDonald's. Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Well, great question. And great job troubleshooting. And I want to point out, it's really interesting that what you thought you saw in the cockpit was not what the engine monitor said when you got the data. And that's why we say engine monitors help so much.
Yeah.
It was actually the biggest lesson for me that in a stressful situation, you cannot trust your memory at all.
The eyewitness is the worst person to ask.
Yeah.
So good job.
No, we do a lot of remote troubleshooting, and we never ever trust pilot reports. We always want to see the data.
You shouldn't.
That's right.
But another thing you said, it's worth mentioning. This isn't really mechanic stuff, but you mentioned that you on the takeoff roll it just didn't sound quite right and so on, and then you finally looked at the engine monitor and decided something was really wrong, but by then you're up at pattern altitude. I just have a basic rule that if anything doesn't sound right, smell right, feel right, or whatever, you always reject the takeoff. You really don't want to take a problem into the air.
Yeah, it won't get better.
Yeah.
The
And
thing is, on this runway, I couldn't do that. It was 3,600 feet long runway. So by the time I had 60 knots or 70 knots, which is my rotation speed, I don't think if I cut the power there and tried to brake, I'd probably run off the end of the runway.
Okay.
So
Well,
I was trapped.
you made it around, so well done.
Yeah. Thank you.
Leave
Well,
the injector
thank you
seat.
guys for discussing this issue with me and for your insight. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Very
great
good.
call.
Great troubleshooting.
Yeah,
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
don't open up the fuel system if you don't have to.
yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
See you, Marko.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Marko.
Our next question is from Dylan, who's trying to treat his engines nicely. Go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you taking this question. I teach out of a carbureted Seminole, got the 0360s, like homies. And, when we're dealing with multi-engine training, there's lots and lots of guidance on safety considerations. But there is absolutely nothing on considerations when you're talking about maintaining health of engines when we're out there putting them through absolute heck. There's no way around it. We have to simulate failed engines over and over and over again. And I'm just wondering,
Cooling.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, hoping to spur a discussion as to, what are some things that we should be considering as far as health of the engine when we're doing all these simulated engine failures?
Well, I may need to recuse myself from this because I firmly believe that all that stuff really ought to get done in the simulator.
Mike, you're such a wet blanket.
Strong believer in sim training for multi-engine training because it's.
Well, but maybe they don't have access to a good sim.
I definitely don't disagree with you. We do have a simulator and we do a lot of that. But even with that, the FAA requires so much of it to be done in the airplane for the check ride. And whether we like it or not, we have to prepare the student for the check ride. So
that's true.
Good counter. Yeah. There is the check ride.
Yeah.
And I remember when I did my multi-engine check ride and my multi-engine instructor check ride, I had a long talk with the DPE saying, now, I don't want you doing X, Y, or Z to my engines. And I need you to agree to this before we go up.
You can do A, B, and C anytime you want, but never X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So for instance, some of the things that I take into account, it's definitely shock cooling, right?
No,
especially when we're shutting down an engine, feathering it in flight and it's cold outside. I mean, that thing cools down in a hurry. So when we restart it, usually I'll keep the cowl flap closed, put it in some sort of zero thrust setting, let the engine warm up slowly before, we kind of put the beans to it.
Well, you've already shock cooled it. So if you actually believe in shock cooling, you have to believe in shock heating. So do them.
No,
both.
he was just talking about shock heating. He was just talking about the restart, which
I know.
I think shock heating is a much bigger problem than shock cooling is.
It's just amazing. We really do get worried about damage from shock cooling. Shock cooling happens. It's the damage that we think that we talk about. We say shock cooling. What we really mean is shock cooling damage. So how often do you fly the airplane?
Pretty often. I mean, it's kind of
every week.
I mean, yeah, definitely.
How many hours on the engines?
They are over TBO.
Over TBO.
Good.
Any cracked cylinders?
No. One cylinder has been replaced.
One cylinder. What you're doing?
There's got to be something. There's got to be something. Somehow we got to convince you that shock cooling is a problem because your engines only lasted this long. Imagine how long they'll last if you don't shock cool them.
Absolutely.
I think you're doing pretty good.
So, the ACS, the Airman Certification Standards, have some consideration in there about any simulated engine failures below 3,000 AGL need to be done with a throttle. And it says specifically in the POH and some guidance that I found from Lycoming that needs to be a smooth retardation of the throttle, which makes sense. The other thing that I wanted to ask you guys is about how we fail the engine simulate the failed engine at a safe altitude. I found some guidance from Lycoming it was the same guidance. It was talking about how it should be done with mixture. And I'm a firm believer in mixture pools for engine failures. I know there's kind of two camps out there. One of them is mixture and one of them is fuel selectors. And I'm firmly against that for many reasons. But the only reason that I can that I've heard from these people from this camp is, well, it adds the element of surprise because you're surprising the student. That's not a good reason for me to even attempt that. I don't want to drain all the fuel out of the lines from the fuel selector to the engine and introduce air into it when I can just shut it off at the carburetor with the mixture. Just kind of wondering your thoughts on mixture versus fuel selector.
I don't think if you shut the fuel selector off, you're introducing air into anything. You're just stopping the flow of fuel.
And you have
You're stopping it at a different place.
Yeah.
I do think that if you're trying to do a realistic engine failure, that it is a lot more realistic to fail it with the fuel selector. Not only because of the element of surprise, but because the power quadrant is handled in the realistic fashion.
When I did my number of decades ago, like we did anyway, it was in an Aztec, and the instructor loved it because his hand just rested on the fuel selectors down between the seats. And on my check ride, most irritating thing, I was ready for an engine failure at any time. I mean, takeoff, initial climb out and everything. But we're out doing stuff. We'd been flying for 30 minutes and then an engine quits and we're at like 8,000 feet. And we're talking
that's where an engine ought to quit.
That's where it ought to. Exactly. And, I'm like 17 or so. So in my mind, we're not having a check ride anymore. We're just tooling around talking about weather and stuff. Uh-huh. And then all of a sudden an engine quits and I was totally taken by surprise. Because I was ready for it at takeoff, which is nobody in their right mind is going to shut an engine down on an Aztec at rotate. But, my mind wasn't there.
So in our house, when the lights go out at night and we're sitting around trying to fall asleep, we start talking about these types of things because my husband's a CFII. And he said he always loved failing the engine by using the fuel selector because it was sneaky. And that's the key thing. You're trying to surprise somebody. And when I expressed shock and said, well, you're cutting the fuel off to the engine. He said, Colleen, you have two. And it occurred to me, oh yeah, we're talking twins. I'm not a multi-rated, but he's like, you got two engines. What's the big deal? It comes back. And I thought, okay, I agree with that.
Yeah. Although Doug was talking about the fact that there's some guidance that says all engine failures below 3,000 feet should be done with the throttle. I think all engine failures below 3,000 feet shouldn't be done.
Shouldn't be done. I agree.
I agree.
I agree with that. The thing is, like on the Twin Comanche, we were out doing a lot of multi-engine or single engine work in the Twin Comanche. This has been 10 years ago when we first finished building it. And we're flying around at like 7,000 or 8,000 feet, and we shut down one of the engines. And this was all fun and games until we realized we're descending. It won't maintain 8,000 feet. It was a nice controlled descent down to about 5. So if you're going to do multi-engine training in a Twin Comanche, which is not highly recommended, I would say, you're going to be somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 feet because it's not going to do well above 5.
Yeah, and that's
well. At least you weren't in an Apache.
Yeah, right. The flying spud.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a consideration that I take into account as we're flying these light twins that don't have the performance single engine.
Yep.
I would like to have that readily available to shove that mixture forward because I can't tell you how many times I've had a student pull the wrong engine when they're going through the checklist items.
Right.
Dead foot, dead engine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, twins, gosh, that's just a whole thing. In a Twin Comanche, if everything is perfect, and if you react within 3 or 4 seconds on initial climb out, you'll survive and get back to the airport. But if everything isn't perfect, you may as well just plan on being a single engine airplane and pulling both throttles and landing straight ahead. Well, not pulling both throttles, but you know what I'm saying? Not because making that turn and staying above the trees on a good day, a loaded twin Comanche, I don't know, 100 feet a minute. And that's if you're on it, if you're on your A game.
So one person that I kind of had a discussion with that liked to fail engines with the fuel selector, and I don't, obviously. One of his reasonings was, well, the mixture cable could break. And I said, well, that's ridiculous. The throttle cable could break too. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous.
Or the fuel selector could break. Yep.
Absolutely. It could stick. I trust the mixture cable a lot more than I do the fuel selector. I don't know.
I actually had a throttle cable break in a Cessna 310Q that I was doing my multi-engine training in. This is before I bought my 310. And came into land and couldn't throttle back the engine and wound up having to pull the mixture in order to land the airplane.
Wow. That's great experience.
Yeah.
We recovered quite a few 172s. There was a flight school in the area 35, 40 years ago, and their standard procedure in the 172 for simulating engine failure was to pull the mixture. And I would say some of the maintenance was not great in the engines. The airplanes were worn out, and more than once the mixture cable came all the way out. That was the end of that.
Wow.
But usually they did a great job of landing in the cotton field or the bean patch or whatever. They wouldn't do any damage. We'd just have to go clear a spot and put a mixture cable in it and fly it out, or take it apart and truck it out or something.
So what I'm hearing
experience.
So what I'm hearing from you guys is really neither one is better than the other as far as simulating.
The restart will take longer if you do it with the fuel selector, simply because the carburetor float bowl is completely emptied. So it'll have to fill back up. So it'll take
with
just
altitude,
a little bit longer.
It's safe.
If you're doing it up high, which is where you should be doing it.
Where you should be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when you cut the fuel off at the fuel selector, the engine's still windmilling for quite some time. And it usually takes 20 to 25 seconds to suck all the fuel out of the bowl of a carburetor with a running engine. But the engine doesn't know that it's not sparking. Well, no, it's running. That's right. It's running until the carb. So yeah, it's all going to be empty.
So does that
take
change?
Some time.
So does that change when we're going through a full shutdown and feather, where now we feather the prop, we bring it out of feather, we've drained all the fuel, so it's going to take longer. That restart process is going to be a little harder than if we would have just pulled the mixture back and introduced the mixture back, right?
Well, you do want to turn on the electric boost pump to get the float bowl filled up again, because the engine-driven fuel pump isn't going to be turning very fast.
Yeah. And on a Lycoming, you're not going to flood it with the electric pump, because the needle valve shut it off at the bowl.
Okay. Well, thank you guys.
Yeah, I don't know that we answered the
question. No engine failures below 3,000.
And no shock cooling.
That's good.
Except
no shock cooling.
Well, the shock heating. Yeah. When you get it restarted, let it warm up a little bit before you
keep doing what you're doing.
Very far.
Yeah. You're over TBO and it's not coming apart. Whatever you're doing is just fine.
Yeah.
But I think we have to induct Dylan into the Overthinkers Anonymous Club.
Yeah. Good job. You're welcome. You're welcome here anytime.
Yeah.
I'm honored.
Okay. Thanks for the question, Dylan. Good one.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
So our next question is for Mike, who just absolutely has to be a mechanic. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, my career was in the auto trade, but I've owned 4 airplanes now, and I've always done as much of the 43 part as I can on all of them, or worked with an A&P. And I love working on them. Well, most of the time.
Yeah, me too. Most of the time.
But my big question is, I've heard so many comments, and of course, laying on a creeper underneath the airplane and cleaning off the oil residue that gets all on the belly and everything like that. And then a lot of commentary about the moisture that builds up in the crankcase and can cause so many problems, that I started to wonder why it is that for piston aircraft engines anyway, there has never been a crankcase ventilation system that has really been effective. The closest I can see is oil separators. That's the best that I've seen. And there's one that I've found from ASA that you can actually plumb into the exhaust system that will siphon off the vapors and stuff like that and cough it out with the exhaust. But I was wondering why there isn't a positive crankcase ventilation system, either based on an orifice type valve or a PCV valve or something of that sort to help keep the engine clean.
I
don't think those don't keep the engine clean.
No, they don't keep it clean.
They keep the environment clean, which is why they do it on cars, because they don't want all of that stuff out. But the difference between piston aircraft engines and car engines is piston aircraft engines have monumentally more blow-by.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got terribly sloppy tolerances. They've got these gigantic pistons and cylinders, and they just blast all of this crap into the crankcase, and you don't want to keep it there. We don't like oil separators, for example, because they're not oil separators, they're liquid separators, and they return not only oil back to the crankcase, but they return moisture and acids and all sorts of other liquid things that you really want to get rid of. So, as long as the EPA is not making us do positive crankcase ventilation
yet,
let's not put that idea that they're on top of us to go to unleaded fuel, which actually will turn out to be a good thing. But no, these engines are very, very filthy compared to car engines, and we really want the filth to leave as much as possible.
So since you're a mechanic type guy, are you kind of a gearhead? You work on cars and stuff?
Oh, that is the first and foremost thing that I love to do, besides my honey, my wife.
So, okay. So just for an exercise to prove Mike's point about how sloppy the engines are, compare the piston to cylinder clearances and the piston ring clearances to that on a car. It is pretty amazing.
You drive a truck through it.
Oh yeah. So your car engine, your well, you don't call it a vernitherm, but the crankcase on a car runs at what, 192 degrees?
Yeah, they're about sometimes a little higher. Yeah, diesels are higher.
But gasoline, spark ignited engines running 192, something like that, all the time.
Yeah.
So they're liquid cooled. Our engines start out at ambient and go up to 400 degrees or 300 or anywhere in between, or 450 or back and forth. So they have to be built to handle these massive temperature changes. And so you have a lot of parts expanding and contracting. Some are steel, some are aluminum, and it has to be able to handle all that. Where your car engine just doesn't have to do that. It's way more sophisticated. Car engines are not airplane engines.
Depends on the car.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Hey, Mike, there's something you could try. It's sort of marginally legal if you're flying a certificated airplane, but just for the heck of it, you could rig up a little catch jar on your breather and go flying for a little while, and then go see what's in there. You won't like what you see.
No. No.
You probably won't pour it back into the crankcase after you look at it.
Every time I open the cowling and I look inside, it's like I not only have to clean the belly, I've got to clean out the inside of the cowling.
Yeah.
Because the vapors just spread that oil and whatever.
When you do this test that Mike suggests, get some pH paper and test the pH of the
Mm.
liquid that you
Yeah.
trap. And then you'll realize all that oil on the belly is not inhibiting corrosion. It's causing corrosion.
Causing corrosion.
That's right. Clean out the inside of the belly of the airplane too, because all the weep holes, a lot of that nastiness is up inside the engine. I mean, up inside the belly of the cabin. What kind of airplane?
Well, my first airplane was a Warrior 2, but I downgraded to an Ercoupe 415
Okay.
CD, and it's got the 4-cylinder.
That's a very cool airplane.
That's a very cool airplane.
I love it. It's very attention getting, but it's so easy to fly once you get over the things that you learned in a regular airplane.
Like no rudder.
It's
Right.
funny when Mike said I've owned 4 airplanes, and my first thought was not at the same time.
Well, actually, I've got 2 right now.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, Khalid's got you beat, but
Don't go
I'm only
there.
allowed to have one airplane at a time.
A Cirrus. Yeah.
And, well, yeah, right now it's a Cirrus, but I had a twin Comanche and a 182.
That's a lot of engines.
But I only owned half of each. So
So
I got out my best mathematician hat and calculated that half and half equals 1, and Helen bought into that. But then I sold my half of the twin Comanche and bought a whole of a Cirrus, and Helen
now
did
you're
not
in
allow.
violation.
Yeah, I was in violation. She did not allow for rounding down. So the 182 went away.
Well, Mike, you mentioned oil separators. You said that some oil separators plumb the crap that comes out of the engine into the exhaust.
Yeah.
I have one of those on my Lancer Legacy, and I think that's great because it's not necessarily it's getting burned before it gets on the belly or makes a big mess. However, we have to be concerned about it
gets plugged up.
plugging up and creating crankcase overpressure. So it's there's no easy, elegant solution for an oil.
I know
separator.
the turbo normalized Cirrus is like that. I don't know about the SR22T, but the SR22TN has the breather teed into the exhaust, so it burns up. And it has a plugging up problem too. It has to be cleaned regularly.
Yeah, there's an ICA that requires some extra checks in part because of that. So that's a thing.
Yeah, that's what I read in the directions for the ASA was that every time you change the oil or every 50 hours, you have to pull it apart and make sure that it's clean. And if it isn't, if it's coking, then you have to clean all that out.
Get it all out.
And get it
What is that? An STC to an alteration of the breather?
I didn't look that far into it. I would imagine it probably requires an STC. Yeah, because you got to drill a hole in the exhaust manifold. So.
Oh yeah, it's an STC.
Yeah.
Yep. Unless you're in an experimental, when you could do whatever you want.
Yeah, still doesn't mean you should.
So Mike, stepping back to your general observation that airplane engines are different than car engines, I'll make a pitch for Mike's book on engines. He has a chapter on that, and it's really fascinating to really step back. You did to think about all the different ways that they're different and why airplane engines are built the way they are versus car engines, how we operate them, and the kind of gas we use and everything. It's very interesting chapter.
Well, it's nice with the Ercoupe because I can. It's STC to run automotive unleaded fuel. Yeah. And so ever since I bought the airplane, that's what I've been running in it. And I have seen a big difference.
That's going to be much better for the engine than running on avgas for sure.
Yeah. I bet you're great. You have good compressions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Jealous.
Yeah, I am a little bit.
Yeah, I try to keep it. I'm an old guy now.
That's all right.
And so it's like, I like to keep things, well, it's the old KISS principle.
Yeah, keep absolutely.
It simple, stupid.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good principle. Awesome.
Good question, Mike. We appreciate the call.
I have learned so much in just the last, 10 minutes. It's this has been an eye opener, and it's completely answered my question and put me on a new course. So
awesome! Yeah,
I really appreciate the help. And I love the part that you were just doing about the wing too. That was interesting.
Yeah. Yep.
So anyway,
enjoy the Ercoupe.
Yeah,
have a good one.
Very cool airplane.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye bye.
So we haven't done letters in a couple episodes. So I'm excited that we have a couple, and we'll do some now. So the first is from Thomas. He wrote in to say about the November 1st podcast. You guys will remember this one because it's a weird one. About the Luscombe and the use of carb heat. He said to look up SAIB CE-14-09R1, dated March 28th of 2014. This SAIB explains why carb heat is required on the fuselage tank and A65 engine equipped Luscombe 8A. There's also Luscombe company information addressing the problem. I can assure you that the above described airplane can suffer an engine stoppage on takeoff and high pitch attitude with less than a full fuselage tank without the carb heat being used.
Sounds like experience.
I've done it. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Ouch. That's bad.
Yeah. So that's an odd one.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at that service bulletin right now, and the recommendations say the Luscombe 8A has unique procedures. The procedure to use full carb heat on takeoff is unconventional, yet necessary to assure continuous fuel flow to the engine. Also, the vented fuel cap must be installed with the vent opening facing forward into the prevailing airstream to pressurize the tank.
Yeah, I get that.
It is physically possible to install the fuel cap backwards. This will decrease fuel flow from the tank.
So what's the carb heat got to do with it?
I don't get that. I'd love to get an explanation of that. I mean, the only thing I can think of that carb heat does is rich in the mixture.
Yeah.
The vented cap and use of carb heat on takeoff work together to prevent interruption of fuel flow to the engine. The use of carb heat on takeoff and climb reduces the power output of the engine by using warm air, and the pitch attitude of the airplane decreases. That's what we heard, and we couldn't believe that was actually what they were doing.
So is it that the carb heat does something to the engine?
It reduces power.
Well, but so I'm separating the two. Reducing power supposedly reduces the angle of attack. So it's the pitch that we're changing.
Increasing the elevation of the fuel tank relative to the carb, assuring fuel flow. That's right out of the SAIB.
So they don't need carb heat.
Yeah, they want to make the performance worse.
They make the performance worse, which forces you to push the nose down.
Yep.
Is it possible that the fuel plumbing can't accommodate the fuel flow when the engine is making full rated power?
Well, either that or something comes unported.
If so, somebody should be shot for that.
Well, so what it said was, it correct me if I'm wrong, which is entirely possible, that the elevation of the tank is too low relative to the elevation of the carburetor. Yep. So there's no head pressure.
Yep, that's what they're implying.
The carburetor's not being replenished with fuel.
But why don't they just say don't exceed a deck angle of X degrees instead of the carb heat? I don't understand the carb heat part.
Maybe it's easier to use carb heat. They actually say you should placard it. Carb heat required for takeoff and landing.
That is so
bizarre. That just seems so backwards.
And the FAA admits it. They say it's very unconventional how they handle this. It has unique procedures. Has to be different, right?
So I wonder if it's
apparently there's a reason for it, but I haven't heard the explanation that I understand yet for the carb heat part.
I'll tell you what to do, but they really don't explain why.
The fuel cap thing makes sense.
Yep.
The deck angle thing sort of makes sense, maybe. But the carb heat, I'm still struggling with the carb heat part.
Yeah, why they chose to address the problem with carb heat instead of limiting deck angle
or RPM.
Well, we always say that we're looking for things to stump us, and I think that's they just have qualified.
Yeah.
So has this always been the procedure on the Luscombe, or is it something that has come up?
Well, the placard, the CAA issued an airworthiness maintenance bulletin in 1941 specifying that you have to install the placard. So it pretty much.
Oh my!
So this was their solution, and it got grandfathered in.
I guess.
Because
Makes you wonder, like,
so this one is just a reminder that, oh, by the way, if you weren't around in 1941, here's what happened back then.
for all you newbies that bought Luscombe's this year.
And
Yeah.
the placard has to be fabricated from 32 thousandths thick aluminum.
What?
There's a picture of it. It has dimensions of how big it has to be and where the screws go, where you screw it into the panel. It's pretty
it's
creative.
unusual. I mean, when you think about them
Wow.
issuing a pilot technique fix for a mechanical problem, it's like
Yes.
normally it would be an AD to fix some sort of mechanical problem,
Yeah.
not a technique to overcome
Well,
some sort of
sometimes
limitation.
they limit RPM into certain ranges because of vibrations in the engine. That's a
Yeah,
technique problem.
that's true.
Sort
Makes
of.
up for.
I'm not
Yeah.
buying a Luscombe.
Sounds like maybe they should put like a big little funnel at the end of that vent on the thing to get more air head pressure into that.
There you
tank or
go.
something.
A big scoop.
A big scoop.
That's STC, the carb
Pressurized
heat
fuel.
eliminator, right?
Pressurized fuel delivery.
I like it. So another oddball airplane here, and that's the 337, the Skymaster. That one came up a couple episodes ago, and of course, people are going to be mad at me for calling it an oddball, but so well.
It's not an oddball. No,
yeah,
the 336, that was an oddball, but
Oh, I
That's
had
true.
one of those.
He said, I've owned a, this is from Chris. He said, I've owned a 337/02 since 2007. So the discussion about Skymasters got my full attention. I just wanted to pass along that I thought Paul's comments about the Skymaster were 100% correct. I also share Mike's opinion. Oh, there you go, Paul. I included this just
Touchdown.
One
Yeah.
in a row.
I also share Mike's opinion that there are things a Skymaster can do that you just can't do in a regular twin, although it's not as fast as many other twins with similar horsepower. It's draggy, and the military version's even more so. But as Paul noted,
very cool airplane.
yeah, it does have maintenance issues, particularly if you're looking for parts for the military version, many of which differ from the civilian model, which is
I
interesting.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's
Said it's still the most fun airplane I have flown.
Wow.
So
Yeah, it is a very
devotees.
interesting airplane.
Give it some love.
It is cool when you're flying it, especially in the pattern, to be in a highway airplane.
But it has
to be able to see.
it has always been a maintenance intensive airplane.
Oh yeah. The 336 we had when I was probably 13 or so, and it was an awful lot of noise. You just knew you were doing 500 miles an hour.
until you looked at the airspeed.
He looked at the airspeed. Oh my goodness! And this was before headsets and intercoms.
That's probably because you were running with full carb heat. No,
Right.
Our next question is from Doug, who is looking to buy one, get two free. Go ahead, Doug.
Thanks. That's a good way of putting it. And thanks for taking my question. So for reasons that are probably kind of silly, my little two-seat airplane has 3 altimeters. And I fly it under IFR quite a bit. And so I have to get the altimeters certified every 2 years. And the regulation is quite clear that every altimeter instrument needs to be certified.
Yes.
And so that's 3 times the cost of getting my altimeter certified each time. And as a longtime listener, I thought to myself, okay, so this is where I need to make use of everyone's favorite regulation, the one that lets you just label things inoperative and then get through whatever you need to get through and then go back to it. But I can't quite make that work, at least not in my mind, because I think to make something inoperative, you have to deactivate it, first of all, from what I can tell. And also, I think it has to be remedied by the next annual inspection, and I want to go 2 years. So and is there a path for me to be a cheap person who only gets 1 altimeter certified?
Well, first of all, I think the premise doesn't make sense because it should definitely not cost you 3 times as much to do all 3, because most of the testing is done once.
Right.
The static leak check, hooking all the stuff up. It would take, an extra 5 minutes to do the 2 additional altimeters. So
Right.
It doesn't make sense. The reg definitely is a little weird as you brought it up. And I checked this out with our avionics experts just to see what they would have to say. But the reg is clear that all altimeters have to be certified every 2 years if you're operating IFR. It does not require that they all be operational. You can placard them in op, but as you say, you have to disable them to do that. You could probably disable them by putting a no peaky over them or something. I don't think you necessarily have to disconnect it. You could just render it inoperative just by hiding it, I think.
Okay, so I don't have to deactivate it. I could just put a sticky over it.
Well, you have to deactivate it.
You have to deactivate.
But it doesn't. But the reg doesn't say what deactivating means.
Okay.
For a glass thing, pulling the breaker and tie wrapping it is deactivating it. For a non-servoed old-fashioned altimeter, to deactivate it, you pretty much have to disconnect it from the static system. But I would argue that covering it up so you can't see it is deactivating it. So I would go with that if you really want to do it. But it doesn't make sense to me that
they charge you 3 times as much.
It should be a trivial amount extra to do the extra altimeters.
What they do is they hook the altitude checking system up to the pedostatic system and just drive it up by, I guess they suck it up to a certain altitude, right? And then they just read the altitude. Their machine says you should be at 12,000 feet, and then they see what the altimeters say, and they look for the delta.
There's actually a whole slew of tests that have to be done. One is, it's not just the accuracy. You have to do a hysteresis test. You have to do a scale error test. There's about 5 that have to be done. They all have to be documented. As an old avionics guy that used to do this quite a bit,
but they would all be done at the same time.
Yeah,
they're done at the same time, but they're all documented separately.
It's paperwork.
I'm not. Hang on.
Okay.
I'm not saying that it's going to cost 3 times as much. I'm saying it is extra effort and extra documentation. It isn't 3 times as much, but it's not just a simple test that we're talking about. If done correctly, this can take an hour or 2 per airplane. And adding another 2 altimeters is not a huge extra expense. I totally agree. So not 3 times, but it is more effort.
Is your concern that some of the altimeters may flunk the test?
No.
Okay.
They all seem to be within 20 feet of each other, no matter what. So
there you go. Yeah, if you were concerned they were going to flunk, you ought to get rid of them anyway. But
my sense was that your primary altitude reference when you fly is the G5.
No, it's my ethos, which is
it's the ethos. Okay.
Yeah. But the G5 runs my autopilot.
Yeah.
It's kind of
right, but the G5 isn't an altimeter.
The G5 is.
It
has an altimeter.
According to our avionics guys, it doesn't. It's just echoing the encoder information. It's not actually hooked to the static system.
I don't know the answer to that. It has airspeed, so it's hooked.
Oh, it's hooked to the static. On the back of the G5 and the GI 275, there's a static and a pedo port.
Oh, there you go.
Yep.
Well, that's definitely true. The GI 275.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Well, then whoever said that, Scott, I guess it was.
He's fired.
Well, I think what he probably meant was, even though it has an altimeter in it, it's not designed as a replacement for the primary altimeter. So
why not? The GI 275 is.
I'm talking about the G5. That may be what he's talking about. If you install it as a gyro, or as an HSI, as a gyro, as an attitude gyro, you still maintain your airspeed and your altimeter as the primaries.
That's true in the certified world probably, but there's
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. There's a lot of experimental people who just use them for the full boat.
Okay. Yeah. Which that gets me all wound up, and we won't talk about that.
Okay. Yeah.
For the life of me, I don't understand why the rules are different for non-certified versus certified when it comes to that. But that's okay.
That's probably a whole other show. Okay.
Yeah.
So I need to find a vendor who doesn't charge me by the altimeter. And
for sure.
Yeah.
And then still get them all done, you think?
Yeah. Negotiate.
You know,
See,
Or, I mean, you could take the steam gauge one out of the airplane if you wanted to, I suppose.
Yeah,
The other two you need to leave in there.
I came up on steam gauges, and the first thing that I look at for altitude is that steam gauge dial. I explain why.
Yeah.
Well, one of the best things that happened to me way back when I first started flying with glass is I covered up the analog instruments and forced myself to get used to looking at the digital. And now I don't look at the analog nearly as often. There's a lot to be said for analog. There's no doubt.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat with my 310. I've got 3 altimeters. I've got an old-fashioned altimeter that's way over on the co-pilot side. I've got a counter drum pointer servo altimeter with a kind of analog-y looking readout. And then I have the GI 275 with the altitude tape.
And I'll just nod my head as if I understand what a counter drum servo altimeter is.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a fancy one before they went digital.
Okay.
It has a little electric motor that turns the needles.
Got it.
Right.
Jeez.
Okay. I think I've got the path forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Or pay.
But when I had my last biennial certs in my 310 that had the 3 things, it was less than 2 hours.
Yeah.
That they turned it around, and I took it to a place that basically specializes in doing these things, doing biennial certs. That's all they do, and they were wham bam, thank you bam, and it was over. And they actually found a pretty massive static leak, which they fixed in the process too.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Bubblegum.
I could see someone adding, I don't know, some nominal fee for the extra altimeter.
Yeah, it is some
maybe,
extra paperwork.
I don't know, $25-$50, something like that, but not 3 times the price. By the way, so what is a standard price for a single altimeter?
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
I'm getting I've been to several different ones because I've been in different places when I've had to have it done. It's in the range of $200 usually.
Yeah.
Oh, that's real cheap.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. But we usually see $350 to $600.
$600?
Yep.
600 seems awfully high, but
I think I paid $240 the last time I did mine. That's wow.
I can get 3 done for $600.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Wow.
Well, when they get into some of the like the Cirrus and where it's all that, sometimes it's a problem connecting. But we don't pay that. But I just see that with some of the airplanes that I deal with, that they'll charge.
So Doug, get all 3 certed and then report back to us and tell us what you paid.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got to find the right vendor first. Thanks very much. I really
and just remember, prices are always negotiable.
Yes.
Find out what beer they drink. That's the way to go.
There you go.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate it.
All right, Doug.
Thanks, Doug. Bye.
We'll see you.
Well, that was just too much fun to be legal. Let's wrap this one up. Hopefully we got a couple of things right this time. Keep us honest by letting us know how we did. You can email us at podcasts@aopa.org.
See ya.
Bye-bye, everybody.